Somewhere in my OR today, I'm sewing a tendon back on the bone because someone believes something they heard at the gym. Not all 10 of these beliefs will do that to you. One of them will, guaranteed, each and every time. I'm an orthopedic surgeon and I don't hear these 10 beliefs in the gym. I hear the aftermath of them in the clinic a few weeks after somebody's shoulder or elbow stopped negotiating. That's the lens for what's coming. 10 beliefs ranked 10 to 1 from wrong but harmless to actual surgical cases. One of them doesn't even look dangerous. It looks like the responsible choice. Guess which number that is? Let's start at the bottom. Number 10, machines are useless. Bro Science danger score, 1 out of 10. Body part at risk, basically none. What actually fails? Nothing, usually. This myth cost you gains, not tissue. My honest take, this one's just wrong. Not dangerous. Free weights demand more stabilizer coordination. That's real. But more unstable equals more real is a bro science leap nobody actually earned.
Machines or free weights?
I would say free weight just because of failure.
Free weights.
Free weights? I want to say free weight.
There's actually no difference.
For a beginner, an older lifter, or anybody coming back from an injury, a machine that controls the bar path lets you load the specific tissue you're trying to adapt without also asking your nervous system to solve a balance problem at the same time. That's not cheating, that's targeting. I use machines with post-op patients constantly. Not because free weights are bad, but because early after surgery, control matters more than chaos. For what it's worth, my own training is almost entirely free weights. Not because I think machines don't work, it's a practical thing. Portability, ease of use, no storage footprint. I can get a full session done at home with a rack and a bar without dedicating a room to equipment I only use for 3 exercises. That's lifestyle preference, not a physiology argument. Better rule, machines and free weights train different things. Use both. The gym bro who tells you machines don't count has usually never had to rehab anything. Number 9 is the one that's gonna start a fight in the comments. And quick question before we keep climbing. Which number do you think is the tendon I've actually repaired the most? Drop your guess now. I'll tell you if you were right when we get there. And if you want the rest of this ranking system every time I break down what's actually landing people on my table, this is the channel. Subscribe's down here, and yes, the intern army pin is worth reading. Back to the list. Number 9, knees should never go past your toes. Danger score 2 out of 10. Body part at risk, your squat mechanics mostly. Real injury risk here is low, but the fear this myth creates causes its own problems. I'm gonna disagree with almost every gym poster you've ever seen. Your knees can absolutely go past your toes. In a deep squat, they basically have to, unless you've got the ankle mobility of a gymnast or you're leaning your torso forward to compensate. And leaning forward loads your spine more, not your knees less. This myth started as a coaching cue to stop people from collapsing forward with zero hip involvement. A reasonable fix that got turned into a universal law nobody rechecked. I actually had Ben Patrick, the knees over toes guy, on my podcast to go through this exact topic. We agree on the core principle. If a joint has a range of motion available, that range exists for a reason, and avoiding it long term doesn't protect the joint. It just lets the tissue around it get weaker in the range you're avoiding. The actual variable isn't toe position. It's whether your knee tracks in line with your foot and whether your tissue tolerates the load, which depends on your training history, not a geometry rule from a 1980s poster. Better rule, knees over toes is fine for a trained lifter with the mobility for it. It's the load and the control that matter, not the angle. This is genuinely bad gym bro advice, and I don't say that about many of these. The related myth, the one that sounds scarier, is next. Number 8, deep squats destroy your knees. Danger score, 3 out of 10. I want to steel man this one before I take it apart because there's a real concern underneath it. Deeper squats do increase certain forces at the knee joint. Patellofemoral compressive load specifically goes up as you go deeper. That's a real biomechanical fact, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But increased force is not the same thing as damage. A 2024 review of deep squatting and knee joint health found the deep squat can be included in resistance training without inherent risks to the knee, provided the lifter has the mobility and progressive loading history to support it. At Human 2.0, we go further than not risky. We treat full depth squatting as something close to non-negotiable for lower body mobility work. Our position is that mobility isn't just flexibility, it's strength expressed through a joint's complete range of motion. If you have the range and you're not using it under load, you're not protecting the knee. You're letting it deteriorate in the range you're avoiding. It's also worth saying this isn't some fringe biomechanics take. Outside North America, the deep squat is a resting position. People use it to eat, to wait, to go to the bathroom for hours of their day, their whole lives. We didn't lose that range because it was dangerous. We lost it because we stopped using it and then built a myth to justify not getting it back. Better rule, the deep squat isn't the villain. Your unprepared ankle mobility and your ego skipping the warm-up sets might be. Now, from squat death to something almost every program gets wrong, how much you're actually doing. Myth number 7, more volume is always better. Danger score, 4 out of 10. Body part at risk, tendons, generally, patellar, elbow, shoulder, depending on what you're overloading. I see this pattern in the clinic constantly. Someone doing 5 sessions a week, 4 months, no deload, and their tendon just stops keeping up. Thanks for coming out, bro. Here's the part people get wrong, and I'll push back on it directly. Tendon injuries get talked about like bad luck. They're not. Tendon metabolism is dramatically slower than muscle or bone. I say this in the clinic all the freaking time. Muscle can adapt and get stronger in weeks. Tendon takes months to remodel the same way. So you build muscular strength faster than your tendons can keep pace with, and if you don't build in time for that gap to close, you get tendonitis, or worse, a rupture. Both of those are volume problems. They are not random problems with the tendon itself. And for more insight on tendon health and development, look to my podcast episodes with Matt Wenning, a world-class powerlifter, or Devin Larratt, a world-class arm wrestler. A 2024 review of weightlifting and powerlifting injuries found incidence rates in the range of roughly 2 to 3 injuries per 1,000 training hours, with the knee, lower back, shoulder, and hands and fingers as the most common sites. And overuse, not acute trauma, drives a meaningful share of these.
If you're like, dude, I can't wait to get to the gym and just declare war on everything, awesome. But if you're at a point where 6 weeks after increasing volume every week, dude, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to work out. I hate it. It just feels like my body's rebelling against me. It's probably time for a week off the gym.
Better rule, volume that outpaces your tendon's slower timeline isn't dedication. It's a withdrawal you haven't noticed yet. Now, coming up, the modern version of this myth, and it's spreading faster than the old one. Number 6, you have to lift to failure every set. Danger score, 5 out of 10. I see this pattern most often in CrossFit athletes specifically. They come into clinics weeks after a session where failure was the whole point, not an occasional consequence. But I've also seen this in videos online of the world's most dangerous gym. To be fair to that side of it, I'm not preaching perfect reps all the time. Life is random, you're not always in a perfect position, and I can genuinely appreciate training intensity. But training to failure on every set of every session is different from occasional intensity, and it's where I start seeing form breakdown that lands directly on a joint that wasn't built to take that load in that position. Your last few reps before failure are actually when your form degrades. Bar path drifts, spine rounds, shoulder internally rotates further than it should. Fatigue makes technical breakdown more likely, and failure training maximizes fatigue by definition. That overlaps directly with the tendon recovery timeline problem from the last myth. It's the same underlying issue wearing a different costume. Better rule, failure sets have a place. Maybe your last set of an isolation movement, not every set of every compound lift every freaking session, bro. The next one is where this stops being about programming and starts being about ignoring your own body. Number 5, train through tendon pain. It just needs blood flow. Danger score, 6 out of 10. Body part at risk, whatever tendon you're currently ignoring. Rotator cuff, patellar, Achilles, distal biceps, take your freaking pick, man. This is the belief I hear most often from patients who are already hurt. It felt fine once I warmed up, so I kept going. That sentence is in half of my new patient notes. Tendons aren't muscle. Muscle soreness and tendon pain feel similar, but they behave completely differently. Muscle recovers in days, tendon recovers on a much slower timeline. And pain that improves during the workout but comes back worse the next morning is a specific, recognizable pattern of tendon irritation, not a warm-up problem. Actually, before I keep going down the ranking, I want to stop here because this is the myth that quietly sets up 3 of the injuries still coming. And I want to be honest about something people underestimate here. Tendon injuries are not inconsequential. Depending on the study, function after a tendon repair typically lands somewhere around 70 to 90% of what it was before the rupture. Not zero, not full. Most people who tear a tendon and get it repaired do not fully get back to where they were. That's the stake most gym bro advice around tendon pain completely ignores. Better rule. Tendon pain that returns worse the next day isn't something you train through. It's something you dose down and load smart, because the alternative isn't just a setback, it might be a permanent problem. Now, that sets up everything from here to number 1. Number 4, kipping and momentum count the same as strength. Get out of here, bro. Danger score, 6 out of 10. Shoulder, spine, occasionally the knee. I'll push back on the CrossFit is dangerous take 2 because that's not what I'm saying. Kipping isn't evil. Kipping without the shoulder capacity to control the movement is the problem. And that's a control problem, not a movement category problem. I'll be transparent about where I sit personally. I don't use kipping in my own training. I prefer strict reps, and I do see the case for kipping in some athletes at a genuinely advanced level. What I frown on is using it to manufacture volume you couldn't otherwise achieve with strict form. If the kip is the only reason you're getting the rep, that's not extending your capacity. That's borrowing against a joint that hasn't been asked to earn it yet. Kipping pull-ups, muscle-ups, high rep overhead work under fatigue, these load the shoulder in ranges and speeds a lot of lifters haven't actually built the stability for yet. Shoulder, lower back, and knee injuries are consistently among the most reported sites across high-intensity functional training research.
Well, there really is no form. You're just going to use your legs as much as you can to create momentum, and it's going to look like this.
Better rule? Earn the strict version before you add the momentum. The kip should extend capacity you already have, not substitute for capacity that you don't. Next is the phrase practically tattooed on every gym wall in America. Myth number 3, no pain, no gain. Danger score, 7 out of 10. Body part at risk, whatever you're pushing through right now. And I mean that literally. This myth doesn't specify. I've had this exact conversation more times than I can count. It hurt, but I figured that's just how it's supposed to feel. That sentence has preceded a rotator cuff tear, a disc issue, and a meniscus flare-up in 3 separate patients I can think of off the top of my head. Here's the reframe I actually want people to walk away with. Pain is a language. Your body is using it to communicate something specific to your conscious mind, and the message changes depending on the location, the quality, and the type of pain. Sharp versus dull, constant versus load dependent, local versus radiating. No pain, no gain treats every one of those messages as the same signal worth ignoring the same way. The people repeating that phrase aren't wrong that discomfort is part of training. They're wrong that they understand what any specific pain is actually telling them. Muscular burn. Deep set fatigue in the belly of the muscle is training. Sharp, joint-specific, or radiating pain is your nervous system flagging a mechanical problem. Different messages, different meanings. Better rule, burn in the muscle, keep going. Sharp, in a joint, or getting worse rep to rep, stop and figure out what the message actually is. We're at the top 3 now, and this is where myth stops and surgical case starts. Myth number 2, if you don't touch your chest on bench, doesn't count. Danger score, 8 out of 10. Body part at risk, the pec major tendon, and the anterior shoulder capsule around it. I'll actually grant this one has real validity, but only in one context. If you're competing in powerlifting, chest touch is a judged rule, not a myth. That's a different conversation entirely. What I disagree with is treating it as a strict requirement in a normal training session where nobody's judging depth and the only thing at stake is your shoulder. At the bottom of a deep bench press, your shoulder sits in extension, abduction, and external rotation simultaneously. That's the single most vulnerable position for the pec major tendon to be under load. And Here's the actual mechanism behind why some people get away with it and others don't. Injuries happen from a mismatch. Either the supporting muscles aren't strong enough for the load, the joint doesn't have the mobility to reach that position safely, or the bar is moving faster than the tendon and the muscle around the joint can compensate for. Full range of motion is good training. Forcing depth your shoulder's actual mobility doesn't support, under speed the tissue can't match is a different thing entirely. I'll be honest, pec ruptures are still relatively rare overall. But when they happen in lifters, heavy bench press under exactly this bottom position mismatch is the classic mechanism I see. And it is not a subtle injury. It's a repair, not a rehab. Just look at my video on the Trend twins and Mikey's tendon rupture for more info. Better rule. Full range of motion within your shoulder's actual mobility at a speed your tissue can control. Outside of competition, nobody needs to force it. And now the one nobody sees coming because it looks like the responsible choice. Myth number 1. Mixed grip deadlift is always the safest way to pull heavy. Danger score, 9 out of 10. This is the one I actually promised you at the start. This is the tendon that I've repaired probably the most. Here's the setup. Mixed grip means one palm faces you, one palm faces away. It's the standard advice for pulling maximal weight because it stops the bar from rolling out of your hands. On paper, it's the safe, sensible choice for heavy pulls. Here's what it actually does to the supinated arm, the palm up one. At near maximal load, with the elbow close to fully extended, that arm's biceps tendon is being asked to resist enormous force in the one position where it has the least mechanical advantage to do it. A case series specifically examining deadlift-related distal biceps ruptures found that every single rupture occurred on the supinated side, the palm-up arm, every time, no exceptions in that data set. But I want to push past the grip itself because the real issue underneath it is training volume, not just technique. This is usually an overtraining problem wearing a grip selection costume. Too many max effort pulls, not enough recovery time for the tendon specifically. If you ask me off the record, at a minimum, alternate which arm is supinated. But if you're not actually competing, the better answer isn't a grip tweak at all. It's pulling slightly less weight with a hook grip or straps. Tendon health long-term is worth more than the extra 10 pounds mixed grip buys you. Better rule? The myth isn't wrong that mixed grip prevents the bar rolling. It's wrong that prevents one problem means creates no others. And if you're not chasing a competition total, there's a version of heavy pulling that doesn't ask your bicep tendon to take the risk at all. My verdict? This list isn't ranked by how annoying the myth is. It's ranked by what actually shows up on my operating table. And the order surprises people because the myth that sounds like the responsible, careful choice is the one with the cleanest surgical mechanism behind it. The clinical detail that sticks with me: nobody comes in worried about their mixed grip deadlift. They come in for their heaviest pull of the year, feel a pop in the front of the elbow, and I'm the one who has to explain that the grip they picked specifically for safety was the mechanism. The one thing I genuinely don't know is how much of this is actually preventable through cueing versus how much is just an unavoidable trade-off of pulling maximal weight with any asymmetric grip. Alternating the supinated arm probably helps. Whether it fully offset the risk on a true 1 rep max, that's not something I've seen on a clean study answer yet. If it depends, and with tendon injuries it usually does, here's what it depends on specifically: your training age, how close to true max you're actually pulling, and whether you've built any pain tolerance blind spots from myth number 3 on this list. A beginner mixed gripping a moderate weight is a different risk profile than an advanced lifter grinding a maxed effort pull. Treat them differently. So, number 1 on the danger scale wasn't the myth that sounds scary. It was the one that sounds careful. That's the pattern across this whole list. The loud, obviously bad advice mostly costs you gains. The quiet, sensible sounding advice is where the actual surgical cases hide. And before we wrap this up, has a tendon injury ever happened to you or someone you train with? And looking back, was there a myth like one of these behind it? Where did you rank number 1 before I revealed it? Be honest, did the mixed grip deadlift even make your top 5? And for more about tendon health and injuries, check out this video right here. And if you've learned anything in this video, then all I would ask is that you leave a comment and give it a big thumbs up to feed the algorithm. Otherwise, as always, that's been a word from Dr. Chris Raynor, not your everyday ortho, where we see one, do one, teach one.